Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 2, Day 4. Today's journal, we're going to be talking about just what side of the war would you have been on. And we've been talking a little bit about the American Revolution, and we're going to continue talking about the American Revolution. So I would like for you to choose which side, British or American, and explain your decision. What impact is this decision going to possibly have on your family, your friends, your town? And give examples of why you would choose this side. I want you to really think about that there are still people who are in the colonies that are loyal to England, that are still loyal to the crown, and if you choose one side or the other, how's that going to react? How are they going to react? How are your friends going to react? Your family? Just a lot to think about there. So, make sure you get that completed. Now, as for our notes for the day, we're going to continue the American Revolution. And the first thing that we're going to pick up on is the eve of revolution and kind of this time period right before the revolution gets to start. And first thing we want to talk about is the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. First of all, the colonial side has a huge advantage in that they're fighting on their own ground. They have some really good generals who are going to make some very great decisions, and they're fighting for their rights and freedoms. And honestly, when you give a cause to a military, historically that has shown to be very successful or to provide success on the battlefield. They're also going to eventually have an alliance with the French, but that alliance is still shaky at best at the start of the war as to whether France is going to back the colonial side or not. Remember, France is not too close to England still at this time, and has had its issues with England over the course of the last, forever. I mean, you can go back to specific events, but let's be honest, France and England have been at it for years at that point. The bigger problem for the colonists here is that the colonists are untrained and they have a very small army. There's a food and ammunition shortage because they just don't have the same resources being provided to them that the British government can provide to their soldiers. And there's no real government. We're going to have the Articles of Confederation that forms and tries to govern the colonies as a government and tries to give them a little bit of teeth to the revolution, but really there's just no true central government, and everybody's kind of divided in some ways, especially at the start of the war. Now, the British, on the other hand, they are well-trained, well-supplied, they have a huge army and navy, tons of resources, and a strong central government. The problem for them is, number one, they're somewhere where a lot of them have never been. It's a new place. It's a new world. They're far away from all of those resources. Once they do run out of a particular resource, they've got to get it from England, which is not going to be a short haul. And then their troops really don't understand why they're fighting this battle. Like, think about right now if you were a U.S. soldier and they shipped you off to fight for freedom for Americans, or like one of our territories in the Pacific. Let's just say we had, the Midway Islands. Let's say they were really populated. It's right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. As a soldier, are you really going to feel your duty is needed there if, it's people that that are Americans fighting to create their own little... Like, you may fight because you care about your country, but in reality, there's just this half-hearted support at home and by the troops. They don't understand why they're doing this. Now, we take a step forward and we come to the Battle of Bunker Hill. And this is one of the first huge battles for the colonists after Lexington and Concord. And it's a confidence-building battle because what happened was there was a fort, and you can kind of see it up here on the chart, but there was a fort here, and what they wanted to do was get access to this fort because it overlooked the city of Boston, and it would have actually given the British a fortified position to kind of quell any types of rebellion in Boston. The problem is that the way that the commanding officers did for the Continental Army that were at Bunker Hill is they waited in the trenches of the fort until the British got very close, and then they would shoot them. And then wait till they get close and shoot them. But they wouldn't waste ammunition just shooting at them far away. And the saying goes, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes. And eventually the Americans run out of ammunition, or they would have just kept mowing down the British troops for long periods of time. And the Navy and all those things did not provide any support. There was no artillery was going to be able to provide support to the position where this battle was taking place. And so, in all truthfulness, the Continental Army had this battle won had it not been for a lack of resources, and that goes back to those disadvantages. Now, we fast forward into the war just a few months. George Washington is going to be fighting the British forces in Trenton, New Jersey. And basically he is separated from the British forces and these Hessian soldiers that they have hired to fight alongside. So it's these German, like, I don't want to call them assassins, but that's basically what they were. And they're in camp there with the British in this little area beside the river. And George Washington, on Christmas Eve, is going to sail across the Delaware. A very dangerous move, as you can see in the picture in the next slide. That's super icy. Would have been very, very dangerous. Sails across the sea, or the river, the Delaware River, and sneaks up behind them and basically takes them prisoner without hardly any fight put up whatsoever. The big note here is that, the war's going to go on another 7 years, but it is a sign that that the Continental Army and the colonists, and what, if you want to call them Americans, are being very successful against the British early on in this war. Here's a picture, and you can see the ice chunks, which could have sunk a boat and killed all of his men in minutes. I mean, you're talking Delaware in the middle of winter. That's not a warm river. Now, we fast forward a year later to another important battle at the Battle of Saratoga. And in September to October of 1777, the Iroquois Native Americans had allied with the British. And remember, dating back to when they were neutral, well, unfortunately for the Iroquois Indians, they chose the losing side this time, and it's not going to work out real well for them. And truthfully, when we get to Native American relations, I still feel like as a historian you could relate this decision by the Iroquois as to why Native Americans are pretty much just trampled on the rest of the time that they are in America as a dominant force. And then once their numbers dwindle down, are just, pushed to the side constantly. But at the Battle of Saratoga, the Americans were able to cut off the British food supply, and so the Hudson River and these supply chains that they had along the various rivers in the United States, or what will become the United States, they cut this off to where now they can't get to their ships. And if they couldn't get to their ships, they couldn't get to their supplies, which meant that now you were on a little bit more level footing. They were also able to capture the army, which was the largest British force in the north. And this is the turning point in the war. If you want to go back and look at why the Revolutionary War was successful, this battle right here is the turning point. Because it convinced France that they needed to join the American cause. And had France not joined the war, it's very likely the war would have raged on for years and years to come. Now, I also like to talk about the battles in North Carolina, mainly because Wilmington and Charleston and some of those areas, they serve as a launching point for a lot of, not trade, but like goods to come in and resources and things like that for militaries, especially when we talk about the Civil War. Wilmington and Charleston are right at the center of that. But General Cornwallis had been sent to the Carolinas. Most people know his name from watching the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. And the British are able to capture Charleston, and then they begin chasing the Continental Army. And they chase them all the way through South Carolina up into North Carolina, up to the area near Kings Mountain. So if you guys have ever been right there towards the edge of South Carolina, right there on the edge of North Carolina, where Kings Mountain is, that's where they were fighting. Unfortunately for Cornwallis, what he didn't realize is that Nathanael Greene had actually backed up into a place where there were other Continental forces. And so he had quite a bit of support there, and because of that, Cornwallis walked into a hornet's nest. There was a large U.S. force there, and it's going to be a major victory for the Continental Army. Wilmington is also captured by the British during this time, and Cornwallis's army, tired, weakened, and low on supplies, is going to retreat from Kings Mountain to Wilmington, and then they're going to march north towards Yorktown, where they will eventually be defeated a few years later. Okay, here is where General Cornwallis's headquarters were. This is the Burgoyne Wright House in Wilmington. You can still visit it today. And there's actually a couple historical houses down there that were used in war times. Now, the Battle of Yorktown was the final battle of the Revolutionary War that is considered the last battle for the British. American forces had been able to corner Yorktown, George Washington taking the forces in the north, and then the Southern forces who had pushed Cornwallis back. Basically, they surrounded him to where he had nowhere to go, and then added with the fact that the French Navy arrived to keep him from retreating to the sea. Cornwallis was stuck at Yorktown that they could have fought to the last man, but it would have been everyone was dead before, eventually they'd have just lost. So anyways, this is the last major battle of the war, and we're not going to talk too much about the map. If you want to pause it and read some of the descriptions, this kind of shows just the progression of the various generals for the British and for the American side. It's also worth noting that there was some fighting going on in what we consider the Ohio River Valley, right there getting close to the Mississippi River, there in Michigan, Wisconsin, kind of that area, and just the groups of soldiers that were fighting all across the country. I think a lot of times we kind of get hung up that the Revolutionary War was kind of restricted to just the East Coast. So, General Cornwallis sends out his one of his men to carry out his sword because he was too embarrassed to admit defeat, and George Washington and the Continental Army have won the American Revolution. Now, questions for today: what were the advantages and disadvantages of both the Americans and British? Give me a few of those. Tell me what the turning point in the war was, and where did Cornwallis finally surrender? Here are your vocab words. Please let me know if you have any questions. If not, I will talk to you soon.